like to welcome you all to the exciting world of sustainable supply chain. In this seminar, we will dive into a critical intersection of the business environment and social responsibility, exploring how to build supply chain that are not only efficient and profitable, but also minimize their negative impact on plant and its people. My name is Omar Hagras, the president of the student chapter. With our expert today, Dr. Justin, who will introduce us about understanding more about this topic. Dr. Justin, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you all for joining this discussion. Um, we have enough people where it can be more interactive. So my question is, in terms of your knowledge, in terms of the sustainability landscape, the first question is, what's your definition of sustainability? And two, what's your interest in sustainability and how it kind of integrates within the supply chain practice? And once I kind of get some feedback on that, then I can actually frame this presentation around that so that it's more meaningful and that you could actually apply it. So anybody.
Okay. So about sustainability is to minimize the environment impact on people and everything. Like we can say that supply chain sustainability not only about the profitability, but about what impact people from maybe emissions, carbon emission or something like that. So and recycling. So we already now in recycling bottles of plastic or something like that. So we introduce a lot of recycling or something to be updated in sustainability. And also the transportation now is go green, so everything is by electricity battery or something like that. The cars and the ships already starting to innovate in more in sustainability fuel.
Excellent. Anyone else? So I'm going to, was anybody gonna say something? Okay. So this is a presentation that I did for the International Supply Chain Education Alliance back in October. So this presentation was centered around creating a sustainable supply chain and how we can kind of look into these particular risks to mitigate these risks and to also create a competitive advantage, which will lead to increased profitability. Okay, so when it comes to a supply chain perspective, hopefully within your courses you have seen the phases of a supply chain life cycle where it begins with the whole design process. So whenever we're looking at the supply chain process, we now want to kind of look at it through a sustainability lens. So let's just frame it like I always like using a smartphone, right? Everybody can relate to a smartphone. So whenever Samsung is looking to design a new phone, right? When Apple's looking to design a new iPad, it's through a whole design process. What new features are we going to add to this phone? What new function are we going to add to this phone? But that's the conventional mindset. That's conventional thinking. Now we have to say, okay, now we're going to be adding new features and functions, but now how are we going to embed sustainable practices and circularity principles into creating that new iPhone or iPad, right? So how do we embed circularity in creating a new iPhone? We can say, okay, what environmental factors are going to play into manufacturing this new phone? How can we have a diverse, supplier base to provide supplies for this iPhone? How can we reduce our carbon footprint from a logistical perspective based on what Omar just said? How do we reduce our carbon emissions in transporting these raw materials to the plant in China, where these iPhones are being manufactured? That's where that sustainability aspect comes in. And whenever we're talking about circularity, we can say, okay, how do we create a circular economy? How do we create a circular supply chain? So how do we create materials, raw materials that can be refurbished, that can be remanufactured, that can be added back into our supply chain network? So for example, going back to a smartphone, how can we take that, manufacture these new iPhones to take that glass, break that glass down, and then create sturdy, quality, renewable glass that can go into new iPhones, new phones and things like that. If you look at the circuit boards have precious minerals in them, right? Silver and things like that. Okay, how do we manufacture it? How do we manufacture that circuit board where it's easy to take out those particular components out of that motherboard, out of an old iPhone, right? And put it back into a new iPhone or mobile phone. So that's where these circularity principles come into play when we're actually even designing the phone. We haven't even manufactured anything yet. We haven't even sourced anything yet. Whenever we're actually designing the new phone, right? That's how you can embed, these sustainability principles into that. And again, yes, we're talking about a mobile phone, but this can kind of go into anything. This can go into clothing. Same exact concept. So whenever we're looking into planning, whenever we're looking into integrating sustainability, hopefully from a supply chain perspective, you've looked at these make to order strategies, these make to stock strategies, these lean principles. So if you're in certain, now this may not be applicable for some industries, but for other industries, you can have this lean mindset where you can kind of integrate sustainability into how you plan for these raw materials. So for example, I could have a two-bin Kanban system for certain raw materials. The more raw materials I have on a two-bin Kanban lean system, the more sustainable I can be, right? I'm reducing waste throughout my supply chain network. I'm reducing cost on my bottom line because I'm not holding as much inventory on a two-bin Kanban system, right? So that could be one example of a plan whenever you're talking about sustainability, because we're actually reducing waste, we are kind of introducing these sustainable practices into our supply chain network. Whenever we look at sourcing, so again, align sourcing with procurement. How do we sort? Where do we source our suppliers from? How do we source our raw materials from a diverse supplier network, right? We've been doing a lot of work with organizations you all know. We're in an NDA, so we can't say what organizations they are, but you've heard of these Fortune 100 companies, and we're working on integrating their supplier codes of conduct, or updating their suppliers codes of conduct, right? So they're updating their supplier codes of conduct just to ensure that they are focusing on a diverse supplier network. They are embedding quality. They are holding their suppliers as responsible in terms of quality, in terms of sustainable practices, in terms of ethical practices, as they hold their own organization, right? So, because whenever you look at it from a sustainability perspective, you as an organization may not be responsible for unsustainable actions, for unethical actions. But if someone within your supply chain network is liable of those actions, now you're liable from a consumer perspective for those actions, right? So if your supplier or your supplier has done something negligent or nefarious, now in the consumer's eyes, now you're responsible. right? Now that is that takes your brand takes a hit, right? We've been kind of protecting this brand reputation for a long time from an organizational perspective within our four walls, but you also have to look at your supplier network as well. Okay, so that's where the sourcing and the supplier and procurement activities come into play to ensure that not only are we acting sustainably and ethically, but our suppliers and our suppliers and our tier 3 suppliers are also acting in the same way. When we're going to make, if we're manufacturing products, we need to engage with our suppliers, with our distributors, with our consumers continually, right? If we are demonstrating sustainable practices, then that's going to essentially create a trickle down effect for our business partners. Now, we as organizations, from a supply chain sustainability perspective, we have high hopes, high expectations for us as an organization, but we cannot make a significant impact alone. It has to include all of our business partners. So that means that we need to continue to engage them in our sustainability practices, in our ethical practices, right? So whenever we're making products, our business partners, the partners of our sub-assemblies, of our raw materials, the individuals that are actually holding our products in their distribution centers, right, in their warehouses, they're also involved in this effort. Deliver. So this is another thing that Omar talked about. So we want to optimize logistics. We want to, not only do we want to reduce costs, we want to reduce our carbon footprint, right? We want to find ways to transport our product most efficiently, to store our products most efficiently, to only produce what is needed, so we do not have excess inventory that creates waste that is unsustainable, right? So we want to look at this. We want to track our emissions. We want to track Scope 3 emissions is a big topic among organizations, in that we want to track our carbon footprint across our supply chain network. Not only within our four walls, not only within our supply chain distribution centers and manufacturing facilities, but we want to track our carbon footprint of our suppliers, of our tier 2 suppliers, of our tier 3 suppliers. Right, and that has proven to be difficult, but that's one thing that organizations are looking into, and regulations are going to force organizations to track their Scope 3 emissions. Now, one thing that's very important, one thing that's been important for a number of years, is that you'll see these organizations disclosing their ethical, their supplier code of conducts. They disclose their carbon footprints, they disclose their emissions, but very few of these reports have been audited. Right. So that's one thing that we've been talking about, and finding a way to, okay, how do we standardize the auditing of all of these ethical and sustainable practices that all of these organizations are saying they do, right? Versus, how do we know that whenever we're creating these numbers, whenever we're creating these benchmarks, how do we know that these numbers are indeed accurate? Right? So again, I think regulation is going to require some auditing to take place from an ESG perspective, from a sustainability perspective. But current state, organizations are, it's just kind of a trust us thing. It's a voluntary thing, which is fine, which is great, but it's still not clearly understood how accurate those reports are, how accurate those numbers are, right? Again, I may be completely off my rocker on that one, but I mean, it's just one thing to consider, right? I have yet to be proven wrong to say, yes, these numbers are spot on. I hadn't seen a report to say that. So that's just one thing in consideration of, on these ESG reports, on these sustainability reports, we need to, look into how do we audit or create these types of auditing standards across the board for these. This is from a internal perspective, logistical perspective, carbon emissions, scope 3 emissions, anything when it comes to sustainability. In terms of use, in terms of consumption, we need to communicate. We need to communicate with our consumers how we can safely and sustainably use and dispose of products. Again, it creates this circular process, as you can see in this graphic here, where all this essentially creates a feedback loop. Right. So we receive this use that goes in, that creates a feedback loop into the sourcing and making of the product to say, okay, we need to source it a different way. We need to manufacture a different way because of the usage of this particular product. Once it reaches end of life, as you can see here, now we can actually create more feedback loops of, okay, we make this change in design, this change in planning, this change in sourcing. And once we go through this full product life cycle, again, this is a continuous process where we can create continuous improvement from a circularity perspective, from a sustainable supply chain perspective. So that's just one high level. So it's kind of a tiered approach. This is the highest level that we're going to go through today, where, make, design, source, make, deliver. So, I mean, hopefully you have some understanding of that from courses and the certification program. So now we're going to kind of go into a little bit more detail on each step. So going into the design process, we want to think about a design for disassembly, right? So in supply chain programs, we say, okay, design for manufacturability, design for this, design for that, but we need to have a mindset of design for disassembly. So we can say, okay, yes, we're manufacturing this product, but we want to create a circular network, a circular economy, a circular supply chain. So we need to manufacture, we need to design this product so that it's going to be easily disassembled, so that we can refurbish as many of these products that we can reuse as many of these raw materials as possible in other products, right? So one thing I ask you to take a look at is Xerox. So Xerox, so back in the day, copiers, Xerox did not sell any copiers. Xerox does not sell printers, right? Because they have design for disassembly in mind. So once a printer reaches, an office printer reaches end of life, right? Because they have design for disassembly in mind, they take out those parts, refurbish those parts, and put those old parts into a brand new copier or a brand new printer, Xerox printer, right? So it's the same thing. Well, a number of electronics companies are trying to reduce e-waste, electronic waste, to have this design for disassembly from a circular economy, a circular supply chain perspective, right? That's one of the main things that we talk about when we talk about design. We want to reduce. You're seeing you're seeing that a lot of apparel companies are taking these renewable products in mind. So they're reusing rubber in shoes. They're reusing rubber in high schools and middle schools and tracks and things like that. So they're trying to design these products where there has to be some part of that garment, every single garment, that's recycled, right? Or renewable. So that's another thing that from a design perspective, Nike's been doing that for a number of years, but because of this the sustainability movement, you're seeing more and more of Nike talking about that as of late. Um, when we talk about planning, you want to kind of map out your supply chain network. You want to look at all of your business partners, all of the players within that supply chain network. Again, going back to emissions, scope 3 emissions, we want to track all of the emissions. You want to track the carbon footprint across our supply chain, all of our suppliers, suppliers. We want to look at the human rights of our suppliers, because even if our suppliers are responsible for human rights issues, then now we're tied to that. Now that's a negative impact on our organization, right? Um, we also want to, from a planning perspective, we want to benchmark, our sustainable practices internally as well as from our business partners. So if our supplier has a sustainability, not really an issue, but if they have a sustainability topic that needs to be discussed, right, then we can actually identify that during the planning phase. We can identify that, we can remedy that during the planning phase before we actually get to the sourcing and the make and deliver part, when we actually need those suppliers, when we actually need those business partners. Okay. When we go to source, we already talked about we already talked about the supplier code of conduct and a number of organizations looking to revise their supplier codes of conduct. We're also seeing a lot of organizations beginning to create scorecards and integrate sustainability and ESG metrics within their supplier scorecards. They're also making those scorecards real time on supplier portals within their ERP systems. So within the ERP system, it can feed in all the on-time delivery. It can feed in all the quality aspects in real time, right? But then once you're actually looking at your supplier information from a sustainability aspect, not only can those suppliers see their on-time delivery and their quality metrics, but now they can see their ESG information, their sustainability information, right? So we're actually starting to see a lot of that as well within the industry. Again, supply chain due diligence and compliance because of regulation that's coming. I know in Europe, a lot of regulation has already come down. Primarily, my primary knowledge is based in the United States, where we have a bill from the Security and Exchange Commission that looks to be that's going to be pushed next year, right? There were 3 bills that were pushed in California about in September, if I'm not mistaken, September-October timeframe. Thank you. Yeah, September-October timeframe, where these public companies, or if you're an organization that makes over a certain amount of revenue, then you have to disclose your ESG efforts. You have to disclose your sustainability efforts, right? So because of that, now there's a lot of supply chain compliance coming down the pipeline. There's a lot of supply chain due diligence coming down the pipeline because, like we said, if there is a supplier that is negligent, then that's going to have an impact on an organization. That's in California, for example. So there's a lot of supply chain due diligence, and we're getting a lot of business in that particular space. Okay, and because of that, in order to mitigate these risks that may emerge during supply chain due diligence and compliance audits, organizations are embarking on supply chain continuity planning, where they are being more strategic in their procurement practices and the suppliers that they deal with. There is I'm not going to say less reliance on overseas manufacturers, but you're starting to see manufacturers come closer to the source, because now those suppliers can be within an arm's reach in case something were to occur. Right. So you're starting to see a shift. You're starting to see a shift in supplier selection and business partner relationships to reduce reduce the risks that weren't there before because of these regulations that are continuing to emerge. Um, well, in terms of make, again, there's a lot of it's going to be very interesting during the upcoming presidential election, in terms of renewable energy and energy efficiency. That was one promise that was made by the Biden administration during the presidency. A little bit of work was done, but nothing. And these are my thoughts. These are not the thoughts of anyone else. Um, in terms of what was discussed and what was actually executed, in my opinion, two different things. So it's going to be very interesting on what's discussed in the presidential election when it comes to renewable energy and energy efficiency. We're seeing a lot of organizations are doing a lot of things behind the scenes in terms of water stewardship. A lot of work is being done on that. Actually, I just wrote a paper. I just posted it on Medium. Um, I just posted on Medium last Sunday on one project, just doing a lot of work on water stewardship on the blockchain. If you're interested in that, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll send you that link. Or you can just type. I think you can Google Justin Goldston on Medium, and it'll come up. But yeah, if you can't find it, just send me a message on LinkedIn. But again, similar to supply chain continuity planning, we're looking at contingency planning from a manufacturing perspective. How do we mitigate risk throughout our manufacturing process? If we have a heavy reliance on uh, Chinese manufacturers, how do we mitigate that risk in case workers strike in July and August, which is the norm in that part of the world, right? So we're starting to see that and our if the workers are striking, is there an ethical risk because they're striking? Right. So we're looking at that on mitigating risk from a manufacturing perspective. If you want to see one of these risks at its best, just Google Foxconn and Apple, Foxxconn. I think it's two N's, but I know it's two X's. Foxconn and Apple. That's a case study that we talk about a lot in terms of supply chain management. We talk about a lot in terms of corporate social responsibility and ethics. So yeah, check that one out. That's a good article on supply chain contingency planning that Apple had to actually implement. Also, yeah, life cycle assessment for manufactured parts. Again, that's one thing that a lot of these large organizations, especially these electronics organizations, are looking into, providing a life cycle assessment of the carbon footprint of a product. So they're trying to track what's the carbon footprint for one phone, right? So that's one thing a lot of organizations are doing. So just imagine Nike with their product portfolio trying to perform a life cycle assessment on all of their products, right? And that's why I'm excited about this particular niche subgroup within the supply chain perspective, because the options are going to be endless once regulation comes out. Again, I know more is regulated. I know there's going to be more. There's more regulation in terms of a European perspective. I just had a call with the European peers last week, so I know there's a lot coming out from that. Just not sure what's going on in terms of Egypt and the African region, but yeah. But yes, if it's not there now, it's coming. So when we talk about deliver, again, greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions for logistics, more organizations are looking to alternative means of transportation. And then also, warehouses are tracking their carbon footprints across their whole entire supply chain networks. And then again, we talked about recycle and reuse. Good, with all these regulations coming out. There's more. I think you're going to see more investment from a infrastructure perspective in terms of recycling. I know that in the U.S., the recycling infrastructure in the United States is nowhere close to Europe. That's why I think that the Europe is a whole lot better in terms of their their reuse efforts, their recycling efforts in the United States. And that's one thing that we continue to discuss in the US. And how do we get that investment to increase the infrastructure? Yes, these organizations are talking about sustainability, are talking about ESG, but we don't even have the infrastructure to support what you're even talking about. Right. So that's one thing that we continue to discuss in terms of recycling and reuse. So ultimately, you know, whenever we create a sustainable supply chain, we're just wrapping up right here. In order to create a sustainable supply chain, we want to deliver business continuity. We want to have increased visibility and collaboration and communication among all business partners, not just our tier one business partners, our tier two, our tier three business partners. Right? Because again, if something were to happen with those lower tier suppliers, then we're going to actually feel the impact as well. Okay. Whenever we talk about building resilience, I think that, you know, if we heard that term supply chain resilience during COVID, you know, and we had that, we'd all be rich. We wouldn't be sitting here right now. Everybody was talking about supply chain resilience, but we have to continue to talk about resilience and things that are going to come up. So how do we talk about resilience? So just how we're talking about resilience during COVID, how do we talk about adopting ESG and sustainability into supply chain resilience? Right? It just can't be a buzzword. There has to be action to it. We had no choice but to put action behind what happened during COVID. If we did not put action behind during COVID, the whole world would have shut down. Right? From a logistical perspective, from a product perspective, we had to have action. The same thing has a hold true from a sustainability perspective. Okay. In terms of compliance, again, that's coming. I mean, there's going to be, and I think that compliance is going to be the only way that organizations walk the talk, because right now it's just talk. Right? They're just throwing out buzzwords for PR purposes, but whenever compliance comes in, they're going to be required to actually follow through with what they're talking about. Okay. Whenever we say open market share and access to capital, because we have these what we refer to as impact investors, some organizations, if they do not see organizations focused on ESG, if they do not see organizations focused on sustainability, they're actually viewed as a risk, right? Where years ago, if you were focused on ESG and sustainability, you were a detriment to the bottom line. Now, fast forward, if you don't talk about it, now you're a risk, right? So because these investors are looking for those things, now you're going to have more access to market share and capital than those organizations that don't really talk about it and don't follow through with it and don't walk the talk. Because another thing is, these investors and consumers, not just investors, but also consumers, they're catching on with the talk, right? They want to see the action that's behind all the talk. Right? They want the proof. That's what goes back to these audits. When all those reports come out, these consumers and investors are going to start requiring audits. Okay, you have all these numbers, prove it. Right? Protects reputation and brand integrity. Once again, if there's a risk across your supply chain network, you know, that's going to be a reputational risk for the organization. That's why you need to have constant communication with all business partners associated with your particular brand or your product, right? And now if you have all those in place, then that's going to have a positive impact on your organization's bottom line. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is that, you know, I even think in a certification program, we talk about the triple bottom line. But again, there's one of the most important things is you know, triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit. But the quadruple bottom line introduces purpose of the organization. Right. And again, the consumers are going to ensure that what you say in your purpose statement, that you're going to follow through with it. right? That's why that I think that it needs to be transferred to the quadruple bottom line, right? So that's pretty much all I had to discuss today. If you want anything more in terms of supply chain sustainability, you can go to the Sustainability Institute at ERM. So I'm partner of Sustainable Supply Chains at ERM. ERM actually does own the sustainability domain. So yeah, that's kind of a big deal. But yeah, if you need anything, if you want anything in terms of sustainability, go on sustainability.com. You can also just reach out to me. Once again, reach out to me at justingoldston@erm.com, or you can just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm posting on there at least 2 or 3 times a week. All right. Any questions?
Thanks, Dr. Justin. First, I can ask the first question. Supply chain is significant by technology like AI, machine learning, blockchain, IoT, cloud computing, digital twins, but how it can impact the sustainable supply chain exactly?
So this, I talk a lot about this a lot. So if you've heard the term Web3, if you go on TED.com, I was the first person to mention TED3 on the TEDx stage, and it was because that I always define Web3 as the integration of the Internet of Things, AI, and blockchain.
Yeah.
Right. And once the regulation happens, and once you have to have all these audits that I talked about earlier, blockchain provides those audits. Right? Because blockchain creates that consensus mechanism to say, okay, yeah, that's legit. Right? Like those numbers are accurate. Then you can bring in AI and say, okay, what's the true benchmarks? In terms of, instead of the organization creating these benchmarks, I can leverage AI and I can say, okay, what's the benchmark? Right? And it's validated by AI. Every AI provides the references to that. Now I can actually embed that AI on chain. So I can use AI, put those numbers, put those benchmarks on the blockchain, on chain, and then I can be feeding that with blockchain and showing it in real time. So I can actually integrate it with my ERP system, no human intervention. I'm doing real-time feeds on chain in the blockchain for everybody to see. Or, but the pushback is going to be that some organizations are going to say, oh, we don't want to show certain information. Okay, that's fine. Now we can use a hybrid blockchain where only certain business partners see data, and then there's certain data where actually everybody sees in real time, right? So all the excuses that we've been hearing for a number of years go away. We have solutions. It just has to be supported. But the problem is consumers don't understand what the capabilities are. That's why organizations aren't really forced to actually adopt them, right? Because when someone hears blockchain, they just think everything's transparent, right? No. You can have a permission blockchain, you can have a permissionless blockchain, you can actually have a hybrid blockchain. We have the solution, right? It's just a matter of adopting it.
Next, anyone have any question? Mariam, go ahead.
Okay, first, I wanted from you to discuss to me what strategies can the business use in their logistics operation to minimize fuel use and to improve the route planning.
Repeat the first part again. I think I got it, but yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I say repeat that again, please.
What strategies can business use in their use and improving route planning?
Okay, you broke up at the beginning, but I think I got it. It's like what strategies would they use to improve road planning? Like I said, you broke up. Was that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
It's accurate.
So yeah. So And again, so these tools are actually available now, where you can actually leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning to kind of create models to kind of improve road planning. If you're not that advanced, there's actually third-party solutions out there that actually, so like one of them's called, like if you look up RoadNet. So RoadNet I mean, I was using RoadNet in 2006, right? So there are like simulation tools out there to minimize logistical costs, to minimize, this carbon footprint. So to answer your question, technology is kind of the key to reducing that, and organizations have been using that for a very long time.
Thank you.
Doctor, sorry, there is first of all, previous the managers manage the lean system only. Now they manage the lean system and sustainability supply chain to adapt to the sustainable concept. With how effective ways they can use them together. All of them talking about eliminate waste. So, in which way they can use them exactly?
Yeah. So yeah, a lean approach is not really a one size fits all approach. It depends on it really from a strategy perspective. It depends on the environment. It depends on the industry. It depends on the culture of the organization, and it depends on the people. Right? If you have an organization that operates in chaos, lean's not going to work. Right? Because you don't have a culture for it.
Yeah.
But if you have discipline in your organization, if you have structure, lean will work. Lean can work. I can't say there's no absolutes. Lean can work, right? Because
Okay.
lean requires a lot of discipline and structure. So yes, in the environments where I've seen lean work, those organizations were structured, right? I've seen organizations in chaos try to introduce lean, because they had a manager or an executive, that heard the buzzword at a conference and tried to implement it. Absolute disaster, because it's not going to save the world if you're not disciplined or structured.
Yeah.
Right? Now I suggest lean from a sustainability perspective, because it doesn't require capital. It only requires time and people, right? So in my opinion, there's no excuse for taking that first step in the sustainability journey. And also, somebody in the organization has heard of the term lean, right? So that's step one. That's your entryway into sustainability, right? That's how I play it. You've heard of it, you can do it, it's easy, and it is actually reducing waste throughout your supply chain and saving the organization money. Now, when it saves the organization money, now whenever you need the budget to actually ask for sustainability initiatives, now executives seeing that this lean sustainability project has already saved me money, okay, we'll sign off on this. It's a strategy.
Yes. I think that we can close with talking about the most important risks that can uh, face the sustainability.
Say it again.
We can close with the most important risks that can face the sustainability.
Oh, the most important risk, or
Yeah, yeah. The most important risks that can face the sustainability.
the most important risk is going to be people.
Yeah.
It's going to be people, because people are going to make or break this process, because the government again the government is trying to make this possible, but I don't think there's enough people within those areas to put the policies in place in the first pass to make it successful, because now it's going to come down to interpretation.
Yeah.
On how each organization interpreted it. Now you're going to bring in all these lawyers, right? So there's going to be multiple iterations before we actually get it right.
Right.
It's going to take a while. It's going to take a while, but my key takeaway is this whole supply chain sustainability isn't going anywhere. And two, if you're learning it now, you're like the very few in the space that will specialize within a requirement that every organization will need. Right?
Okay.
So if you kind of specialize in supply chain sustainability, you're setting yourself up for success in the whole entire supply chain space, because almost nobody knows it because it's so new.
Yeah.
Right? It's so niche. ERP consultants, dime a dozen. That's what I used to do. Purchasing people, dime a dozen. Forecasters, dime a dozen. Now some of those are going to be gone because AI is going to take over their jobs, right?
Right.
But sustainability, that's a profession that's very new. So if you get in it, you're going to be in very high demand.
Okay.
That's just something to think about.
I want to ask if anyone have any question? Okay,
Yes. Yes. What role does technology play in optimizing and enhancing supply chain sustainability?
Technology drives everything, in my opinion. I might be biased because I am a tech guy, but technology provides the transparency. Technology provides a transparency and visibility into proving all of the actions that we're actually looking for. Right. So in my opinion, technology is everything into sustainability, because we have these the UN SDGs, right? United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, right? 2030 goals. How are we working toward it? Nobody knows, because we don't have the data. The only way we're going to get the data is through technology, right? So technology is going to actually prove to us where we're sitting at current state in 2020, in a couple of days, 2024, right? We're 6 years away, right? How are we working toward it? Only technology can actually identify that.
Okay, I think that will be all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Justin, for your time, for your more information about sustainability, useful information. Exactly, yeah. Thanks for all. I think that will be all for today. I hope to meet you, Dr. Justin, in coming future, yeah, and meet you again and speak to you soon. Thanks for all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye.